Oh, okay.
Okay, well, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. I'm English Gibb. I'm a professor here at UNC in public policy and the environment. And I'm so excited to have this conversation today because I actually didn't get to meet all the delegation in Egypt because people were going at different times and it was a really crazy 45,000 person conference. But just to give you a little bit of background of these UN climate conferences, so they happen every year. And 197 parties, so these are countries, national governments, they all go to a country that has been nominated as the host country for the COP, so Conference of Parties. There's a lot of acronyms that these folks might throw around in a second, but just if you don't understand the acronyms, feel free to raise your hand and I'm sure they'll explain. And so this is the 27th of these COP conferences that have been taking place every single year to debate how we can cooperate on climate change. And so this COP was pretty notable because it was in Africa. And so the issues of climate change adaptation and resilience, they were really at the front and center. And so it was a really great opportunity to see a lot of issues that the students are, and they'll all introduce themselves and talk about their courses of study and what topics they're interested in. It's a great place to see all of these issues really play out. You see the science and the politics and business. That's been an increasing large sector of the participation at these conferences. Hello, come in. So you have to, can you sit there? That would be great. So I think without further ado, I'll just pass to Bella, who helped me organize and corral everyone. So thanks, Bella, for helping to organize this session.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Bella. I'm a senior at UNC this year. I'm studying environmental science on the quantitative energy systems track and also minoring in urban planning. And yeah, this year was my first COP, hopefully not the last. And looking forward to sharing my experience.
Yeah, just go down.
I'm Christian. I am a junior studying biology and public policy with a minor in environmental science. Like Bella, it was also my first COP. So yeah, I'm very excited to share what I took away from that experience.
And I'm Melissa. I'm a master's student in regional planning. Also my first COP. And I am interested in planning for natural hazards and climate mitigation.
Hi, my name is Ezra Mott. I'm a third year environmental studies student. And it was my first COP as well, as I think it was probably all of our but I am interested in hydrology and freshwater systems, and it's more like the science aspect of it. So really interested in it.
Hey guys, my name is Megan Minow. I'm a senior.
My first COP. I study quantitative energy systems and physics, and was super excited to learn about a bunch of stuff there and happy to show up.
And my name is Max, and I'm a junior, and I'm doing IPR and public policy, and I went to the great campus, so learned a lot there.
Anna?
My name is Anna Gibbons. I'm a junior environmental science major. I'm a minor part of ethics and science. And I was looking at following events of the ocean and as well as food security and farming. And my first topic as well. So, yep.
Okay, great. And I know that Megan and Melissa, you have to take off a little bit early, so maybe we can start with you two. If you want to give folks online and then also in the room just an overview of what it was like to be at the COP and maybe like one or two things that were unexpected for you that you learned, and then maybe some advice for other students who may want to participate in future COPs, like what kinds of things did you wish you had known before coming to a conference like this? So I don't know if you want to start with that.
Sure.
That's
So-
a great photo, by the way.
The COP is a pretty wild experience, I think, in general. There's so much going on, and it's so many people. It's in kind of such a large area. And I guess what surprised me is that it seemed to me like there were almost like 3 conferences going on that just happened to be in the same place. There were like political negotiations that you could sit on. There were kind of the really sort of more science professional side of things. With a lot of the NGOs, and then there were groups of more like climate activists, and more kind of community organizing. And so they're all taking place next to each other. There are some people moving between, some people like totally separate in just their zone. And that for me took a lot of like getting used to. So that would be my advice for kind of next year, to know that going in, there are kind of like different sections happening. And so if you feel like you're like spent a whole day within one section, there's probably more that you can break out and go into. And I would recommend that you make sure to take some time and spend some time in each of those spaces. They really give you a really different impression.
In terms of the topics that you were interested in, what were a few things that you learned that maybe you didn't have a different understanding based on your studies or your experience? Did you get to see any of the issues that you studied play out at the conference?
Yeah, well, one of the like really big issues going in, I think that everyone was watching, was the loss and damage negotiations. And that again, within the three spaces, everyone was talking about it differently and had different expectations of what was possible. And I thought it was so like interesting to have kind of a surprise ending to that story, where at the beginning, or even in the second week when I joined, it seemed like there was absolutely no way, like that. I think it was in the second week, which the like John Kerry briefing, where he was like, we will not, like that will not be on the agenda, but to see it break through and sort of, it was in the section of COP where we don't get to see a lot of those talks, so you can see it sort of happening in parallel, but still be surprised. So
For those who may not be familiar with what loss and damage is, can you give just like a brief description of what exactly that is and why it was such a contentious issue, particularly for the US?
yeah, so the idea of loss and damage is that in a lot of cases, money, or the way that money is being transferred right now, it is more in kind of the like mitigation and prevention, but at some point, you would have loss and damages where you kind of you're paying for something that's lost that cannot be gotten back. And so the idea of loss and damage funding is like very similar to sort of reparations, where countries who are contributing more to climate change would be sort of moving funding to those countries who are suffering the greatest consequences. And it's been really contentious because it's like very politically unpopular for some, like somewhere like the United States to move a bunch of their like money into these countries that are really kind of at the front lines of climate change, even though that is kind of where the responsibility lies. And the conversation for this COP, and I think many COPs before, has been whether there's going to be this loss and damage fund, whether it's going to be kind of a standalone mechanism and how that would work. And so the expectation, I think, was that that sort of funding mechanism would not be agreed upon during this COP. But it was, I think, because like towards the end, the European Union, which was along with the United States and a lot of the global North countries, traditionally had really pushed back on that idea, sort of switched their position, and it ended up sort of pressuring the United States into agreeing to at least the mechanism as something separate, although there's a lot of still be worked out.
Okay, great. Meg?
Yeah, sure. I echo everything that's been said about the logistics of the COP. It's kind of overwhelming, but like in some way. At least that's how I interpreted it. There's a lot going on everywhere. You want to talk to everyone, and it seems like everyone is an expert. I really enjoyed kind of the way in which I entered the COP. The very first session that I attended, was at the Ocean Pavilion. And the first thing that they said kind of like set the tone for the rest of my experience, which was, hey, the IPCC second report has come out. And the main thing that everyone should know, if you don't know anything else, that achieving 2 degrees is impossible right now. Achieving 1.5 degrees is like also pretty much not possible. And we are certainly past the point where we can just curb emissions and have a positive outcome. We are at the point where we like actively have to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And that just set the tone for me for the rest of the COP. And I became really, really interested in learning about carbon capture technology while I was there, because all the experts are there to talk about it. And carbon capture is not something that I have studied through my academic tenure so far. So that was really, really cool for me. I didn't expect that to be a theme of my COP, and it totally was. Secondarily, I got very interested in green hydrogen. Through being there, that is something that I've studied a bit, but it's very cool to hear from other countries' perspectives. I would add that in general, I did not anticipate, even though it was the COP of Africa, I did not anticipate the United States not feeling very like prevalent throughout the conference. Pretty much from the moment we got there, I didn't think about my context as an American or like coming from the United States at all. It was just over here with the rest of the world, so here with Africa, which is very cool. And the only other thing that I really wanted to focus on, there's one of the slides that I don't know if you can control it, but one of the slides at the end, I kind of actually like formatted. So something that happened that was very cool was that this year, for the first time, the African Business Leaders Coalition kind of like put out their commitments. And this coalition, yeah, that one. So this is a coalition of 55 CEOs of the largest private companies in Africa, basically saying like, hey, if the Western world, if the developed world is not going to come and give us your money, and the African Development Bank is like doing its best, this is what we as the private sector are going to do. And the guy who like kind of like keynote address was
This guy?
no. So the guy who keynote address his name was Peter, I don't know how to say his last
Peter
name.
Bacher, WPPSD.
No,
No.
he's the president of Safaricom. So Safaricom is like Kenya's largest telecommunications network. And he just basically outlining what these ABLC's goals are. Somebody at the end is like, hey, great, we got these awesome goals. How are you gonna do it? And he's like, actually, we've started, implementing some technologies that are actively doing this. One of them is MCOPA, which is this one. So MCOPA, if you guys haven't heard of it, is basically like the second generation of M-Pesa. If you guys haven't heard of it, Venmo is basically like America's M-Pesa. And M-Pesa started like back before smartphones. So Africa got there first, we got there later. And M-Copa basically is a financing tool. So like through your phone bill, you already bought your minutes, you can finance assets like solar panels. And it just happened to be that like 2 weeks before we went to COP, I met the founder of M-Copa here at UNC.
No way.
His name is Jesse Moore, an alumni, he's a Moorhead. And so I'm like sitting there in the back of this room, African business leaders all around talking about what they're gonna do. And then the guy says, M-Copa, Jesse Moore, and I was like, what? What did you just say? Like, just made the world very, very small. Yeah, so that's kind of, those are my tips.
That's awesome. That's great. Who would like to go next, or any questions? And I know both Meg and Melissa have to get off. So is there anyone who wants to ask them specific questions before we turn to someone else? See if there's any online. No questions yet. Okay, well, hopefully, if you think of one, you can ask them before they have to do. Anna, maybe we'll just, come back over here.
I think my advice for people who are going to attend COP in the future is just to ask as many questions, because like you literally, I never knew how little I knew until I got there, and I was surrounded by people who are experts in energy and like every single aspect of the environment. So I'll tell one little story, but I was sitting in a Food for Climate Pavilion at an event about alternative protein and talking about soybeans and all kinds of things to move away from animal products and finding protein sources in other things. And I asked a question about, there was a pastoral
Orleans farmer from Cameroon, who was on the panel, and I asked her, like, is this an option for the United States? Like, can the countries of the United States and these larger cities use aspects of pastoral farming? And I introduced myself to the panel, like to the room, and afterwards, the president of ProVeg, that's the company, it's a company in Germany. The German president of ProVeg came up to me and said, wow, that was a great question. I'm so glad you're here as a student representing young people. Like I mean, have a 15-minute conversation about the future of alternative protein. So if I hadn't said anything, then I would have never would have met him, and I never would have that conversation. So it really just goes to show that you are how much you put yourself out there, and especially in an event of 40,000 people in the sea of intelligent people. That was my
So what about ocean?
that was one of my favorite pavilions, was the ocean pavilion. I really enjoyed. We went to an event on carbon capture, and then I think the digital planning thing. They want to digitally plan the entire ocean in the next 10 years. Just an entire UN delegation of people trying to make that happen with like unmanned underwater vehicles and like sensors.
Can you explain for those who don't know what a digital twin is?
Sure. So let's say you're building an office building. Like people use CAD, like 3D software to like build them digitally before it happens. Digitally twinning is the idea that like in that 3D model, you could import live action data to like show you what's happening, right? So you could say, okay, I don't want to just like CAD build a random building. I want to CAD build this building in this place. Okay, what happens to these materials if the environment looks exactly how it did on March 3rd, 2015? We have the data for that. Okay, this concrete's not going to work. So you have actual live data, and you can actually like do predictive kind of like assessment then, where you can say, okay, if we, say that the entire atmosphere is 2 degrees warmer, what does that do to materials? So now instead of building the ocean, which just hasn't been done before, it's been done for like cars and automotive industry and construction industry. But the idea of doing it with like a living natural environment is very new. And so we went to a session where the woman who is doing it right now was giving a presentation. So
Did you feel like oceans were really integrated into a lot of the negotiations?
someone else can help.
I would say so. Yeah, because definitely my area of expertise is with water and water resource management. And so I definitely took a lot of key takeaways about what people are trying to do to like not only like mitigate pollution to the ocean, but just like how we can utilize it as a resource, like with carbon capture and just like carbon sequestering agents. So that's definitely something that they're trying to look more into, that I realized. But with the nitty gritty of it, I'm still learning myself, but it was cool to actually get to hear some thoughts about it.
Who was this that you're with here? Is this
Oh,
Grace Sue?
This is Grace.
Okay,
Yes,
that's what
I
I thought.
am
That was Grace
obsessed
Sue.
with Grace. She's definitely somebody that I learned a lot from, and like definitely like again, just like the networking aspect, getting to meet her and like learn about what she's done and like what she plans for Singapore's infrastructure, especially with water. Like the first thing that I got to attend when I attended the conference was her talk about water resource management, and specifically how Singapore has like, for prior context, they were under British occupation, so like they didn't really have any infrastructure that was for their own country. So they, for like the last decade or so, they've been very reliant on Malaysia to import all of their clean drinking water from. That contract expires in 2061. So recently, Singapore has been trying to optimize and upscale their water resource infrastructure, and so they've installed, I think, 4 solar powered desalination plants, and so like they're trying to figure out ways to not only like make themselves more resilient, but like sustainable and circular. So I thought that was really cool.
Did you try any of the new water? Because they've also, in addition to the desalination, they've also
have huge amounts of wastewater recycling.
Yeah,
And actually, the relationship with Malaysia is really interesting. So they used to, as you said correctly, import water from Malaysia for drinking and other purposes. Now they are able to recycle so much of their water, they sell it back to Malaysia.
yeah. And so like they're actually like it's making a profit for them too. And so like it's just the whole idea for them being very circular was like something that really stuck out to me. Also not necessarily from her, but from that exact panel, I just learned so much more about like what the rest like from a US perspective, it's very polarized in the sense that we don't view water the same as other countries. And like I appreciate that COP was also hosted in Africa because those voices were a lot more amplified, especially with like drought resilience, and just like how they are so much more water scarce. And something that really stuck with me from like even now, and I still think about it, is the fact that there's a lot more social impacts with water. In places like Africa, like there's higher rates of domestic violence associated with water, and like we don't think about that in the United States a lot. Like if that were a case, that would be a very rare and nuanced case, but that occurs like on a daily basis in Africa, and so it's just like something to think about. Like everywhere is different, and even though like a direct impact of us using water is like, sure, we're using water, we have drought in California, but like it's severely more detrimental in other places than just here. So that's something that's really like resonating. Do stuff here.
Can you expand on that, on the domestic,
I mean, it was more so just them talking about like their own, I think it was somebody from the Senegal who was discussing just like their perspectives about how they're trying to utilize like more groundwater resources. So like digging into aquifers and stuff like that, because they're having a lot more cases within their like police departments and just like their own local governments about higher rates of domestic violence because again, like back to the degree, like infrastructure not nearly as developed as more developed nations. And so they're more like reliant on water for like physically going to wash their clothes or like provide food because water is a nutrient resource for all of those things. And so because of that, like there's just ultimately higher cases of domestic violence because the family structures of these places are a lot different than what we would have here. So again, like women are more like more responsible for handling a lot of household tasks and like again preparing food, cleaning clothes, just like basic things. And again, like just because of the location and like the social norms, like that is just the result of that.
Yeah, I had a student actually who did her capstone looking at this issue, and so there are statistics about higher rates of gender violence, because women, as Christian said, are often those in charge of collecting water, and so if they don't have access to centralized water resources or aquifers or wells that are close by, often they have to travel very far distances to collect that water. And it's a safety issue because when you think about women traveling alone and or often with young children and then to go collect that water, it opens them up for all types of potential violent attacks. And so, yeah, like I think this is a really interesting point and something that you certainly get to experience. I mean, it's so cool. You turn around and there's like somebody from Senegal and then there's someone from Singapore and there's somebody from Zambia. I mean, it's just, I think that's like one of the benefits of going to a UN conference and yet being able to then see the perspective. Because yeah, I think you're right. Like most Americans, it's like we're not water scarce here. And I guess like last year was a drought year for North Carolina, but we haven't been in a drought situation.
And again,
we don't
even
think
with
about it,
like
yeah.
drought resilience too, like it's not the same degree everywhere.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
kind of what Melissa was talking about, the idea of loss and damage. I appreciate that like in places like Africa, they're focusing a lot more on early action and like early warning systems for like maintaining and mitigating future risk. But again, like that's still like logistics are still being worked out. But I like appreciated that because I know drought resilience and water resource management is definitely on the docket for a lot of future UN conferences. Like I know even in March 23rd or 22nd to 24th, they're having a water conference in UN headquarters in New York. So like I definitely know it's an issue.
Did you get to try the new water beer that they had at the
No.
I'm so upset I didn't get to try it.
No, I saw that they were out. I honestly didn't find like Like, I didn't find the Singapore pavilion until the third day. I couldn't find it until the third day. So, they were out by then, and also I went during the second week, so it was just like.
It's okay,
They were
that's
out
fine.
Yeah.
Well, it was the first year they had a pavilion, it was amazing, we thought they were brilliant.
Sally's really well into like the vulnerability index that I pretty much didn't even know existed until attending COP. And there's a lab at UNC, the D3R, I think it's called. But two of Dr. Scott's, Phil Scott's, yeah, she's like the head of that lab. And there's UNC graduate students doing research to broaden the vulnerability index and because it's not inclusive of the most vulnerable population. And just to have that brought into conversation is so important for me as a aspiring scientist and hopefully policy maker, but like to hear about and to understand that there is no way forward without catering to government.
Right, and I think that, one thing that I really enjoyed and didn't really expect initially when it's in COP was that, there was a huge focus on vulnerable populations, but I heard so many indigenous voices and there was like a space that was created for those people, which was so pleasantly shocking. Because it's been marginalized, from these conversations for so long, and that they are the ones who are experiencing like the fruit of the issues. So I remember, I think it was like the closing, one of the huge closing, talks, like, it wasn't like some of the issues, but, there was a woman, a young girl, actually, she was a youth, delegate from Brazil. And she was an indigenous person, and she was talking about her experience, and like the people's experience with, the pollution and deforestation, and like specifically acid rain issues that they had. And she was with a group of other people who were not indigenous, but they really do explore that conversation, and like she really took it and ran with it. And
What about Max and Bella? Are there perspectives that you'd like to share? What issues were you following and anything that struck you that was unexpected that you learned while there?
Yeah, I wanna feedback off of Anna's initial comments about the level of accessibility at COP. That was something that was really surprising and unexpected to me as a student. And people there were also surprised that an undergrad student were there and not so many undergrad students from one organization was there. So that I think just my presence and my identity of being a student, I think was a way that I could get people to talk to me. People were interested in talking to me. What's an undergrad student doing here? What are you here to do? So I would say, I'm gonna cater my comments towards like students who are considering going to COP. Yeah, definitely go as a student, whether you're an undergrad or grad student. That definitely makes people see you more and be willing to answer your questions. So with just that one method of like being a student and asking a single question, that was my way in to talk to people and to talk to panelists. So that was one way that I just came back home with like a stack of people's business cards that I didn't. Home with a stack of people's business cards, and those business cards are limited. You don't give it out to everyone. Once you run out of the paper business cards, they're done. So yeah, just something that was just like blew my mind was got a business card and like VP of climate change at WWF or the director of the UN International Council on Environmental Economics and Development, founders of startups or reporters from global and national broadcasting systems. Like that was just crazy to me what I came back with. So yeah, go when you're still young, as early as you can.
Even on the bus too, like.
Yeah.
I actually had conversation, like on the shuttle just to the conference.
Yeah, I've been
But
there.
that's the best way to meet people because their taxes are stuck. They can't.
Right. And as long as it's sort of, as
Yeah.
smooth as the transit system was, it definitely, you would either have a very short talk or a very long talk.
It is so true.
Yeah, it wasn't just the COP itself, it was anywhere that you were in that area, everyone was there for COP, so you could talk to anyone, and literally on the bus, we met a professor from Duke. So that was.
Which one?
I don't know her name. But, yeah, sort of, in terms of content, something that I was least experienced in and was also most interested in was the climate finance aspect. So if I could just give like a one-liner tweet. I wrote in my notes, like, investments in clean energy must accelerate 6 times faster than the current rate for the minuscule chance in limiting global warming temperature under 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, and at least half of those investments must be allocated to developing economies to compensate for their disproportionate climate change impact of loss of damage. Yeah, in terms of like buzzwords, like loss and damage was a big one at COP. Comments that differentiated responsibilities, the voluntary carbon market, a big use of food and agriculture. So every COP, there are new topics that are like the new buzzwords for that year. And these were just the ones that I heard over and over again.
Nature-based
Yeah.
solutions.
Yeah.
Oh, super hot, yeah.
I know like private sector companies, that's a big thing for them right now is to look at like, not only how they can finance stuff, but just like give back to the United States, the environment. So it's good to see that as well. I get a lot of things.
Do you think that they were earnest, these businesses and private?
Now,
sector?
I mean, I can't even say the politicians were the same, like they were being honest completely, because I know some people definitely like, I like Grace, for example, I know she's definitely like a forefront person attacking climate change. But then I like would say I have encountered and did witness like a lot of just people playing politician and knowing and like saying what you would want to hear just because like you're at a conference. That's what everybody's talking about. So it'll be interesting to see later in the future how like logistics from all of these joint integrated initiatives play out. And that's definitely something that I'm trying to keep up with, but from a private sector standpoint, I sat through a talk about carbon pricing, carbon quantification. So I know a lot of companies are like focusing on their ESG and CSR models. But from a nature-based solution standpoint, that was new for me to hear. So definitely something to do more research into myself, but it was good to hear, like, I know UI, they are planting like some trees in the Amazon. But again, like, they could probably do so much more just for how as big of a firm as they are. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how,
Yeah, I can say that I think about and ESG investment. I think at this point, like 2 or 3 years ago, wasn't as big now. And we sat through one panel and it was just like, I would say just in that late night where it was just on. It just was a little frustrating because like learning about these nature-based solutions there, I think there could have been more of an effort from either the moderators or whoever was the panel to say more on that. I think at this point, companies are already pushing for that, so they get out that. But something that, speaking back to the youth, I did an interview with someone on the youth representation, and I was just talking about how, like, I think they like to say that the youth are there, so like, well, most people were in attendance, but they were actually in the. And I think that's where the conversation has to start changing, at least, like, at least invite them on the panels at the very least, but more so like in that protocol that there's like 3 different topics going on, and so making sure they're included in some kind of negotiation. I think you were set up on like recommending that you like conference 9 a.m. always just like setting up the agenda, and so I did really join the like
Oh, great.
communities,
Oh, that's
communities, committee. so it was awesome because I think anybody going next year, whoever goes in the future, like find your group of people real quick. Because I met this girl from GM the first day while we were registering in line, and we became the best of friends the whole time. So she was sharing her agenda that they sent her, and then we met like so many people because we kept on going to the same talks around transit energy. And so by the third day, we all come to one up, like, have fun, but also like learn in a collective way. And so I think that's another takeaway, is just learning to find your group right away. But I think big takeaway for me was that just mobility wasn't at the forefront as I thought it would have been.
Can you define that?
Yeah, so inclusive like transportation, which includes like from a stance of aviation, cars, as well as public transit, such as buses and scooters. That wasn't, so basically traditionally transits offered either it's unaccessible for the price or offered some places that aren't practical, and so kind of making it accessible for all. And that includes a collaboration with the private sector. Public is not going to always want to fund that. And so just talking to different people, there wasn't a day just for transit because that's a huge portion of missions and whatnot. And so I think maybe if there was even a half day of that would be nice for next year. Because the like bottom line, that policies that were laid out following this COP for just related to transit don't even meet the Paris Agreement yet. So I think maybe looking to strive toward that next summit, as well as just in the mention of transportation and agreements, would be a reasonable goal set out for Paris. So I just learned a lot. I haven't heard much from the private sector on carbon capture and like the 1 billion. And it was great hearing about what was being done in the US. And I think for big energy companies, like they're gonna have to find an alternative. So in a good way, I guess, that they're investing in that technology to help a lot of.
I think, yeah, technology was also at the forefront of a lot of discussions, like utilizing, like, I mean, even like the data driven lab here at UNC, like they utilize machine learning a lot for carbon monitoring systems. Like the US Center. Oh yeah, that monitor is made by NASA, and it like basically would like rotate out like live feeds of the atmosphere and like current carbon levels. And so I thought that was cool, just like ozone levels and stuff like that, which is in regard to like technology policy right now. I think it'll be very interesting to see how not only like the public sector would utilize it, but like private sector, but like how the public sector would also utilize it. Because like the US government, from like the US perspective, the US government doesn't really regulate technology or big technology companies like that. So like even walking through like Meta's pavilion was really cool, because like you could see how they were trying. It was something in terms of monitoring like ocean currents, I think, like global ocean currents, and like using AI technology within the metaverse to like map that out. And so I think that was really fun.
Yeah, and that's definitely been a change from different COPs. I mean, it used to be that the buildings were just focused on international organizations, intergovernmental groups, and then governments. But now companies, they can actually pay. So like one of those booths is like several $100,000.
Yeah, and theirs was decked
Yeah.
out like a lot. So I know they probably.
It's a lot of money. It's
Yeah.
crazy how much these- so yeah, these tech companies are now, I think, even more present and dominating a lot of different spaces. So.
And I also think too, like even when I sat through the early warning signals, they were talking about trying to introduce a lot more private sector discourse, because they wanted to get like everybody has a smartphone. Like the majority of the like global population has a smartphone. So like if you have access to a smartphone, you can use technology to set an early warning system or communicate something out effectively. And I think it can also be a double-edged sword, because I sat through a communications panel, and it was like a contrast between the US versus like Africa's main form of communication, because uniquely enough, Africa uses telecommunication or like radio a lot more than we do in the United States. Like, I feel like it's very taboo for us to like want to listen to the radio, especially in our generation. And so for them to like be willing to listen to like experts speak on the radio about like COVID, for example, they were a lot more prepared and like understanding, willing to listen, because like one, these radio talks would be on air for everybody. They also mentioned that they were in local dialects, so like that's a lot more engaging for people and more comfortable for them. And then just like that aspect of it being public access is just like really, really good for them. And so just like, and then they contrast that with like our Amber alerts that we get on our phones, like 24/7, like they were like, you can get a lot of alerts and like that might be somewhat of a nuisance, but at the same time, like you're getting it immediately versus like having to wait for 6 o'clock news briefing. So it's interesting to see how things are played out with that.
I think talking about communication, like that's my like background. So there's a couple panels on communication. It's along the lines of how you best communicate as scientists. I know, like, and then sometimes have technical language in it, but I think for everyday people, one tool that they're like looking at researchers are in Europe, they actually the Weathermen are starting to talk about, you know, not what the temperatures will be in the future, but what it was like 20 years ago. And remind people right then and there, like, oh, and at the highs, like 80, this is record. Not even when it's a record temperature, just whenever. I mean, like, actually 5 years ago, this is the term. So kind of reinforcing people what it would have been 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and whatever setting you're talking about, I think can, you know, best translate to an average person that has 5 seconds of their day to like pay attention to it. Because I know we're all enthusiastic about it, but not everyone is the kind of within the conversation.
And like with communication too, I don't think this was really touched on a lot at COP. It was mainly just like a lot of joint initiatives, but I didn't really sense the like get a feel for people appealing to like, I guess for an example, like an underdeveloped nation to a developed nation, and it was more so like, okay, we'll fund you if you do X, Y, and Z, but it wasn't like an appeal from like an empathetic standpoint per se, because you like with a lot of climate initiatives, you can lay out all of the logistics and like say you want to do this, but it's ultimately if other people are willing to accept your plan in their nation as like if it's going to be most applicable for that like the best just like it's a behavior thing. Like you can't necessarily force somebody to change. You can't force them to adopt something. And it was mainly just people laying everything out. But like I hope again with like more accountability and like more communication, like it gets a lot better. But like I just kind of seen a lot more like you do this, we're gonna do this, and like we're gonna meet in the middle, not okay, we're gonna really attack this from like a joint integrated approach. And we are just going to tell you what to do and you do it. Like it's not really like a persuasive or like understanding kind of dialogue yet.
Sorry, I don't know your name, but do you want to share some reflections and what issues you followed, any unexpected findings or learnings, any advice for future attendees?
Yeah, I'm Abigail. I'm a senior in I think my favorite takeaway from COP was to remember to include other disciplines as well. My favorite talk that I did was talk on feminism, and the opening speaker was, I believe she was a poet in Thailand. And what she spoke was beautiful. I don't remember the words, unfortunately, but it made such an impact on me in that moment. And the panel as well, it was very, not exactly youth focused, but it was young focused. And it was just very refreshing. They were very passionate. And I think remembering to include that side in the conversation as well helps reach more people. And that was something I wish I had seen a little more at COP, because it's rightfully so very science focused, but having some balance there is very nice.
Yeah, I think there's some pictures of art that folks took, which is great.
The
Yeah.
Turkish stand.
Okay.
One of the panels that I went to, there was a model from, I don't remember her name, but she was speaking as like a climate activist, and I thought that was really cool to have representation of this scientists and policymakers, but, I mean, not everything she said. You know, maybe the most factually accurate, but it was nice. It drew people's attention in, and it really, people were good, sure, them like, more people are listening if you have a platform, and if you're saying it in like the right way. So I think that it just shows how key communication is and knowing your audience, because nothing kind of it's just a bunch of nothing.
During our week, we heard LE voting was coming. Like actually LE voting was coming, and I don't think any of us have heard side of that, but she apparently was there, so they did try to engage.
Yeah.
They did try to engage a lot of people that way.
Yeah, I feel like maybe Leonardo DiCaprio, who's been at previous talks, Harrison Ford has sometimes come, who's the Harry Potter one? Emma Watson, yeah, she was, I felt like she was at last year's, yeah, she was at last year's talk in Toronto, and so, yeah, there are a lot of celebrities who do talk, but yeah, it's kind of hard to, but I'm not a celebrity either, so sometimes I'm like, I don't know who these people. Well, great, thank you. Do you have any questions from folks in the room? Do you wanna?
I had so many questions.
Great.
Yeah, and just to introduce myself, I'm not a student here. I actually work at the Institute for the Environment. No, my name's Alex Hopkins. I'm a research associate at the Energy Transition Initiative, which is a brand new program that's housed at IE. I had a bunch of questions, but the first one maybe I'll start with, because a lot of my work right now is focused on implementing the Inflation Reduction Act in North Carolina, in the Southeast region. Did that come up at all? I don't want to make this all about the United States.
I actually did, so our board, she just staff and I went to, she grabbed lunch and then she took me to it was on the IRA and energy, and so 5 different energy companies were there from the US, and it was a small, like, little group, and I had I've just read a brief on like the IRA and energy before, but how they laid it out, I think what they were talking about with relation to energy is the investment in hydrogen, at least in the Northeast, is what those energy companies are doing. And I think what was really interesting about the IRA is just how many, I forget like the percentage of tax credits, but like how much investment is going to be poured in from like top down almost. So I know Duke Energy was at that, when they were talking about nuclear. So basically there's 3 different, I guess, levels of investment that you would get versus like you're building on like recycling on a pool site, you would do it like, I forget, but like some percentage of funding. And then if you were to make it like a certain size, then you would get like another like 15%, and basically it cuts it down to almost like 50% of the investment for these energy companies to start either like investing in. I think what the government's trying to push is, I think it's supposed to be open-ended because they can't endorse one particular, but they're going to try and push solar out of all of the new wind or hydrogen for solar. So heavy investment in solar across the whole thing. But that talk was so confusing to me, and so above like what I was like talking about, and everyone that
You're not a tax law expert?
yeah, there's like so many lawyers there from like all these law firms that like deal just with like Congress and tax regulation, and I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna take the minimal notes that like not learn 2 words from here, but there's just a lot. And then there's another guy from Duke Energy, he was like a lower level guy. Still very.
But I do think on a broader level, it has helped restore some of the credibility that was lost in previous COPs. I mean, I was at the 2016 Morocco COP during the US election when Trump was elected, and it was just like all the winds just got deflated, and no one had any interest in seeing what the US, and then from 2017 all the way up until the pandemic, going to those COP, I mean, no one believed anything, and like the US was there just putting on pro cold panels. So it just, so I think definitely the IRA, yeah, people were excited, they were energized. And I think it helped to restore some of the credibility and having President Biden there.
Yeah.
That meant a lot. And I think many of you got to go to that, presentation. So I think that really did mean a lot because, US has basically been absent at the negotiations for the last several years. So I think
John Kerry doing them too.
Yeah.
He would rotate around the US Senate a lot. So it was good to see his
Yeah.
face and like actually speak to him. And like allow him to like ask questions or not like allow people to ask questions to him, just like show that like we are trying to do something as a nation.
he's a pro too.
I guess one, no, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, just looking back, like the hydrogen credit, they were saying, there was some from like State Department. And basically just like the board of energy efficiency, we call it fuel or fossil fuel free. And main thing was gas furnace being off and trying to help other nations do that as well. I think having the IRA implemented with that stipulation is gonna help drive them at least on the negotiation level, work with other countries, and then targeting electric and geothermal, I think, kind of makes it with natural gas in some way, and then this would be a great starting point for countries that can fully transition. I think that was laid out.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah, yeah,
This is
please.
kind of open-ended and it's selfish because I started this job back in July, like we're trying to build this initiative about IE, and I'm just curious, like, how is this experience and the other studies you have ongoing, how is that inspiring what the next thing could be looks like? Well, what is next and what are you drawing? What kind of inspiration are you drawing from this experience? I know some of you are seniors, I think, and some of you aren't, but I'm just curious.
Right, to speak more generally first, if anything, this COP gave me the validation that I needed or the assurance that I needed to stay in this industry, if anything. I went into COP really just not having like no expectations, not knowing what it would be like. And I think after having gone and made me realize that it's not just environmentalists are going, it's not just environmental groups that are at these conferences, especially this COP and the last few, there's been just a huge increase in private and public non-government organizations that are there to talk about, what are that organization's next steps in terms of their environmental sustainability. So that just showed me how much like climate mitigation action was growing globally, not just to people who want to save the world.
I think 6 months ago, my idea of what my career would look like was very different. I was like, oh, I'll be on the government track. I'll work for my local conservation district, maybe state government, federal government, whatever. And then I have studied Arabic, so I'm also interested in like the Middle East region. But then also attending COP gave me like the idea that it doesn't have to stop in the United States. And like my work can be more than like confined to North Carolina or
In your career?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like big goal for me is to work for the United Nations. And like now I'm in contact with a potential grad school advisor at Wilmington. She is on the Science and Policy Council for the United Nations. She just got like started her term, so I could be working with her. So just like being exposed to a million different companies and like different people who have taken different paths, and to know that the options are there and you are limited by how much you know. So the more you know, the less there is.
Some diversity of tracks that you can take more broad.
You go ahead and help with that because that's basically what I took away from it. Like COP was a buffet of every facet of the climate that you could possibly think of, and like even things that you can't think of, it was exposed to you, and like whether you liked it or not. And so like I had a really meaningful conversation with her name is Lisa DeMarco, and she is the CEO of a international climate change law firm based in Toronto, Canada. And me and her really like hit it off because I was asking her about her work in she has a background in like toxicology and like environmental foods. And, like that's kind of similar to what I do now. And she's taken that and like it's helped her navigate herself and like give her credibility within regulatory frameworks. And like she's based in Canada, but still like she works in her field with like national governments, big firms, and like she's more so from like a carbon quantification and like carbon taxing standpoint, but like she's been able to move and navigate herself within all of the different disciplines of climate change just because she doesn't look at it from a very like single nation state perspective. And like she, like you said, you can't tackle climate change from your own motherland's lens. Like it's not feasible. You have to look at it internationally, globally, and like see how something can be connected because everything is connected to the environment. And so something for me is like I've really gained perspective in what I wanted to go to law school beforehand, but like I was still like kind of frustrated, like trying to figure out what field I wanted to go into. And I literally met the person that like of the field that I want to go into and like I'm looking more into now. And so like international climate change law is like a thing and like very much an emerging field for law because like the environment changes so rapidly. And so that was something that really gave me more perspective and just like inspiration in itself.
I think coming away from COP, it really emphasized for me the importance of actively curating different perspectives from your own. So for me, that means applying master's programs abroad, ideally outside of the West too, but depends on where I get in. And beyond that, I'd like to work implementing some of the mitigation and adaptation strategies that we prepared.
Yeah, and then I'm like mainly working with EVs right now, and so it's a mix of energy, kind of just adjusting my frame of mind to like the energy sector and the technology solutions that are being like used to help big and small companies. So kind of looking at that as like a change of mindset.
Okay, we have 3 minutes and I asked people online if they have any questions and they have not responded, so.
I do. I'm Colin. I'm a first year environmental science student here, so I'm very opposite of a math member, although still new. One of my first questions is like in the media, and a lot of times like climate change activists especially get painted as kind of like doom and gloom, very pessimistic. With COP, do you think you could categorize it as optimistic, pessimistic, realistic? Like, what was the overall kind of like, I don't know, like vibe isn't the right word, but like kind of outlook for the future going to this event?
So one night I was like at a dinner and this girl who I guess has been going forever. I think this lady's great in moments, but like she's been going for a while. She just broke down and was like frustrated that like it's just not reasonable and it's not like the degree of temperature rising. And so I think then talking with the youth, it's like, oh my God, we're so excited, like we want to be at this table. And so I think almost like the energy that people are bringing the next year or in coming years, I think was positive for me at least to like show that like people one are doing research on all levels, two that like they're invested in this, and three like that they want to be part of the solution and they're not gonna have all of them, but they want to at least be mentored in the right direction. I would say two different perspectives, but that's like my takeaway from it.
I would agree. I was in line for coffee and just started talking to the woman in front of me, and she was the president of Thanks Money, and she was like yawning. I was like, oh, it's time for coffee. Like, wait, we're here. The morning coffee ran out. And it was like, yeah, I'm a little sad today because it's like getting to me, like the state of the world. And she was like, you're really young and you have to be I said, I was like, well, I'm youth and we have to be the happy ones because we're leading the charge. Like, yeah, don't lose that energy. Like we need you to be here and to raise your voice. That was a very like inspiring moment for me to have like someone who is a big voice in the industry, like be encouraging.
Yeah, I honestly do think it like depends on the stakeholder that you speak to. Because I met a friend, she's from Budapest, and she was actually part of the Hungarian, like, top party. And so the Hungarian diplomacy, like, they invited her to come as well. And so she was actually in the high-level negotiations, and she would report back to me, and she was like, I can't stand these old men talking about, they probably don't even understand. And so, like, she, like, same age, similar age to us, like, was having a similar experience of just, like, getting frustrated with how some of the diplomats were handling, like, negotiations, and if they were really, like, putting anything forward. So I honestly, like, doom and gloom depends on who you, like, really engage with. Youth perspective, definitely, like, a high amplified voice, and, like, there were a lot of like, strategies that the youth were discussing, like the youngos group. They were actually planning on trying to meet with these high-level policymakers and, like, try to find a seat at the table. So, like, I know they're very adamant about trying to promote change, but then you have, like, the top down to effect where it's just like the people who already are in power, like, they're just trying to keep their power and, like, keep their voice.
Are you personally feeling more optimistic, or?
I would say I'm personally more optimistic just because I don't like, I came back with it more like from a realistic standpoint. Like, I just heard such profound things. Like, it took me weeks to process everything that,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
actually really happened from this trip. But I can, like, at the end of it say I'm very, like, I have a good aspiration for what the future looks like for what I'm gonna do.
Abigail, what about you and Bella?
I was gonna add the doom and gloom conversations, you have to look for them. They mostly happen in informal conversations, like with you and with you with, like, the populating. And I would say the official side events or the pavilion panelist speakers, something that I noticed was lacking was a kind of back and forth between the panelists in the same session. So the voluntary carbon market, I went to 2 different sessions. For one, it was full of, like, private company chief sustainability officers, and the other one was talking about the same topic, but a totally different group of panelists from organizations that I don't know. But that second group was entirely bashing the voluntary carbon market and how it should apply for companies to continue emitting and receive credit for offsetting when they don't actually know, does investing like X million dollars in this organization that plants trees for your offsets, like, does that actually work? There's not really follow through. So I think the doom and gloom you have to look for, and I would say that there was a lack of that front facing debate back and forth.
I think also from, like, a private sector standpoint too, it's more so like they're trying to protect the brand image as well. So that was, like, a key factor for them to just, like, try to save face. But, like, again, you did have to try to look more for, like, people who were being more pessimistic. So
Abigail, closing word. More optimism, less, more pessimistic.
It was pretty mixed, but I think it erred on the side of positivity. We were there when the population officially passed 8 billion. And one woman on a panel referred to the population as 8 billion possibilities, opportunities, which was, I think, the first time I'd ever heard the world population being referred to in a positive way. That really stuck out to me in a nice way, actually.
Well, thank you all so much for around to our panelists. Well, really, I'm so impressed. I've been taking students for 13 years to these COPs, and you all managed to navigate and really find your way in an amazing way, and I think got a lot out of it. So I'm really hoping that we can use you as spokespeople and models to encourage more students to follow in your footsteps and to continue representing this community at these conferences, because I think it is so important. And what you experience, we can never teach you. I mean, Bella took my climate change class. I can never teach you in a semester what you experience in a week. And so I just think it's really great that you all took the risk and the leap to go and really got a lot out of it. So thanks so much for coming and sharing. And thanks for audience online for also tuning in. And with that, we have some cookies, so feel free to hang. Do we still have this room? We have this room for a little bit, right? Yes. Okay, we have this room for a little bit longer, and we'll get kicked out. So. Okay, thank you so much. Bye.